The logical reasoning section of the LSAT asks how well you dissect and attack the logic of arguments that you are presented. It's all about how well you can understand what an argument is saying, find where the holes in the argument are, and understand how to combat the logic presented to you. There are different components to the LR section, but we can simplify it, and when we do, we can improve our score fast. Let's dive in. Step 1. Understand the argument. LSAT logic is very basically premise plus premise equals conclusion. Premises are building blocks of arguments that are used to justify conclusions. Here's an example from an actual LSAT. Double-blind techniques should be used whenever possible in scientific experiments. They help prevent the misinterpretations that often arise due to expectations and opinions that scientists already hold, and clearly scientists should be extremely diligent in trying to avoid such misrepresentations. We can break this argument down into premises and conclusions. Premise 1. Double-blind studies help prevent misinterpretations that often arise due to expectations and opinions that scientists already hold. Premise 2. Scientists should be extremely diligent in trying to avoid such misrepresentations. Conclusion. Double-blind techniques should be used whenever possible in scientific experiments. The premises in this argument combine to justify the conclusion. Pretty simple, right? That's basically all of LSAT logic. Premise plus premise equals conclusion. Step 2. Argue with the speaker. The LR section isn't just about identifying premises and conclusions. That's just the foundation. We also have to argue with these stimuli. To argue on the LSAT LR section, it's our job to take the premises as fact and attack the conclusions. Here's why. If we attack the premises of the argument, we would need outside knowledge. For example, let's look at this argument from the LSAT. An early entomologist observed ants carrying particles to neighboring ant colonies and inferred that the ants were bringing food to their neighbors. Further research, however, revealed that the ants were emptying their own colony's dumping site. Thus, the early entomologist was wrong. First, let's break down the stimulus into its premises and conclusions. Premise. An early entomologist observed ants carrying particles to neighboring ant colonies and inferred that the ants were bringing food to their neighbors. Premise. Further research revealed that the ants were emptying their own colony's dumping site. Conclusion. Therefore, the early etymologist was wrong. Arguing with the premises wouldn't really be arguing, would it? Take the first premise. We can't say whether the early etymologist saw ants carrying particles to other colonies or whether he actually inferred that they were bringing food. We weren't there to know. We have to take this as fact. Same thing with premise 2. We can't say whether or not further research showed ants were really emptying their dumping site. We don't know. We have absolutely no clue what the researcher saw, so we have to take this as fact. But what about the conclusion? Why does the early etymologist have to be wrong based on the premises? He doesn't. What if the dumping sites the later researcher found was actually a food dumping site? We don't have a premise that tells us that dumping sites don't contain food, so the conclusion isn't justified. If you can see that, you can argue on the LR section of the LSAT. Step 3. Predict the answers. Predicting the answers is the best way to improve your score on the logical reasoning section. On the LSAT, 80% of the answers are completely wrong. There isn't a second best answer. There isn't credit for answers that are almost right. As America's great philosopher Ricky Bobby once said, if you ain't first, you're last. Therefore, you shouldn't compare answer choices to each other. That's just a race to the bottom. Comparing answers to each other is bound to confuse you with wrong answers designed to sound right. The better solution is to predict answers and compare answer choices to the answer you predicted. Answers will almost always be related to your understanding of the argument, aka the premises and the conclusions, or your argument against the stimulus. Be on the lookout for our series on LSAT question types. But for now, let's just put it all together in one final example. Political candidates' speeches are loaded with promises and with expressions of good intention. But one must not forget that the politician's purpose in giving these speeches is to get themselves elected. Clearly, then, these speeches are selfishly motivated, and the promises made in them are unreliable. Step 1. Understand the argument. Premise 1. Politicians' speeches are loaded with promises and expressions of good intention. Premise 2. Politicians' purpose in giving these speeches is to get elected. Premise 3. Politicians' speeches are selfishly motivated. Conclusion. Therefore, the promises made in them are unreliable. Step 2. Argue with the speaker. To argue, we must accept the premises and attack the conclusion. So, I accept the fact that politicians make speeches with promises and expressions of good intention. I also accept the fact that the purpose of these speeches is to get elected. I can't argue with this. I don't definitively know. Finally, I can't argue with the idea that politicians are selfishly motivated. Who knows? But what about the conclusion? Even if the politicians are selfishly motivated, why can't their promises still be reliable? If you don't come through, are you really going to be successful? We don't have a premise that says if you're selfish, you probably won't follow through on your promises. I don't buy this conclusion. Armed with this, let's go to step 3, predicting the answer. This question asks us to find a flaw. Our argument is that even if we accept the premises as fact, the conclusion isn't justified because there is no reason selfish people trying to get elected can't also reliably come through on their promises. So our answer will say something like, selfishly motivated promises can still be reliable. Answer choice A. This isn't our prediction. In fact, the argument didn't do this really. It has elements of our prediction, but it doesn't fit 100%, so we'll move on. Answer choice B. Details matter. The speaker said unreliable, not never kept. So this is definitively wrong. It's tricky, but we must read closely. Answer choice C. This is nothing like our prediction, so probably no. Answer choice D. This is basically our prediction, but with better diction. This is almost guaranteed to be the answer. Answer choice E. Our prediction didn't mention worthiness. That wasn't the point of the argument. Wrong. D is our answer. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe so that you get the best LSAT videos on the planet. Also, check out simplifylsat.com for our complete guides to the test and our private tutoring options.